Hello, everyone. Welcome. I think we're going to get started here. Thanks, Dave. First of all, thanks so much to the First United Methodist Church for hosting us here in this amazing space. And also thanks to MCAT, Missoula Community Access Television, who is recording this in the back there. The bathrooms are through this door around the ramp if you need them. I'm Winona. I'm the Climate Action Coordinator for 350 Montana. We're one of 200 local affiliates of the international organization 350.org. And our goal is to work to force our polluting triad, Northwestern Energy, Montana Public Service Commission, and the Montana Legislature to transition as quickly as possible from coal and methane gas to cheaper carbon-free renewable wind, solar, and hydro energy. This is very high. That's much better. Before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge today that we're gathered on the territories of the Salish, Kootenai, and Kalispel peoples. They continue to inhabit this landscape and have cared for this land for generations. Victor, Alexander, and Michelle, respective leaders from these tribes, met in what's now called Missoula with the Superintendent of Indian Affairs and the governor to sign the Hellgate Treaty in 1855, which established the Flathead Reservation. Climate work is, as you all know, inherently land-based work, and we can't separate the place that we live from the people who have lived here and continue to do so. However, land acknowledgements are only a beginning. We also acknowledge the need for concrete actions and steps to support Indigenous communities and provide real restitutions, both in our personal lives and as a community of climate organizers. Such actions include supporting Indigenous-led organizations, paying real rent or otherwise contributing financially, and shifting organizational practices, norms, and composition. Our first speaker tonight is Makenna Sellers. Makenna joined MREA as Executive Director in 2022. Her professional background includes community organizing and renewable energy advocacy at the state and municipal levels. Earning her degree from Gonzaga University in Environmental Studies, Sustainable Business, and Music, Makenna's academic pursuits included climate adaptation strategies while building the university's first campus-wide composting program and climate-driven, interdisciplinary dialogue through the GU Office of Sustainability. Before joining MREA, Makenna led a diverse coalition of Montana businesses, conservation groups, and financing institutions to enable CPACE, an energy efficiency financing and economic development tool for commercial buildings. Makenna lives in Helena and can be typically spotted basking in the glory of the town's top-notch trail system with her dog Junie or performing with the Helena Symphony. So I'd like to welcome Makenna.
How's this for sound quality?
Good.
It's all right? How is it for MCAT in the back? Excellent. Well, thank you, Winona, and thank you, everyone, for the warm welcome and invitation to speak with you all today. My name is Makenna. I'm the Executive Director for Montana Renewable Energy Association. Thank you for, it's kind of funny to hear your own bio, but today my intent is to provide you with some information about the status of MREA, give you a little background about our organization, and I've also been asked to lend some of our expertise as far as presenting some of the trends in adoption rate, technology, and uptake of renewable energy projects, resources, and development happening in the state of Montana, while also taking a broader look at some nationwide trends in the past few years since the passage of the IRA. So this is what I'm planning to cover, a little background on who we are, our members and mission, some of the work that MREA is currently focused on, what's happening with renewables in Montana, state of clean energy jobs, and conclude with some potential calls to action. And I know that Evora Glen will be telling you more about some local climate and sustainability initiatives. So that's the preview. Let's dig in. So MREA is a member-based nonprofit dedicated to advancing the renewable energy industry of Montana. And we do this through three main pillars. That's education, advocacy, and industry engagement. So we're made up of consumers, supporters, and industry professionals who are driving the clean energy economy and changing lives for the better. Ultimately, that's the reason why we exist. MREA is an umbrella organization, meaning that we have a whole host of different members that fall under our nonprofit membership-based model. So we have the potential student who's interested in becoming an electrical engineer or getting into a renewable energy career. We have the homeowner who might have just installed solar and wants to know the scoop about what's this whole deal with net metering and how do these credits work? How do I interact with the utility, whether it's my rural electric co-op or potentially an investor-owned utility? And then we also have the businesses that are the driving force of the jobs and the workforce in the renewable energy field, ranging from distributed, this is quite tall, I found myself getting on my tiptoes. What if we do this? How do people feel about this adjustment? Can you all still hear me okay and still see the screen? I think that's a little more comfortable.
The MCAT mic is a little one.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll try not to disrupt it. So our members are cued into renewable energy policy, technology trends, implementation, and we also provide a lot of consumer guidance. And so like I said, we range from the student who's interested in pursuing a renewable energy career to the installers that are the driving force of the businesses and the economy. And I have here for you a map of some of our members. So these are our installer business members. So we don't cover the whole gamut of our nonprofit members. We have a number of cities who are involved also, local municipalities, agencies. Some of the ski hills, actually, Big Sky and Bridger Bowl are members of MREA. So you can tell by the smattering of members that I've told you about that we have a pretty wide umbrella, and that is by design. So our intent is to be advancing the renewable energy industry of Montana through all avenues, and that means talking with a lot of different players, institutions, schools, municipalities. And so you can see on our map, I tried to include the logos. Don't ask me for GIS help because this is not a good spatial representation. We've got some clusters here, and we had to put Bozeman Greenville. They're still in Montana, but they just happen to be at the bottom of this page. But this is a good visual representation of some of the installer companies that are represented through Montana Renewable Energy Association, especially at the policy level. So you can see here tonight, just scanning the room, I know that SBS Solar, Ralph Walters is the owner, and he's here tonight, if he wouldn't mind raising his hand, MREA member, and he would be happy to visit with you along with any of our MREA installers that you can find on our directory. So I mentioned those three big pillars of MREA's focus, and so that is advocacy, education, and industry engagement. I'll go into a little more detail just to give you a better flavor of the type of work that we're focusing on. But on the education front, we cover a myriad of different topics empowering everyday Montanans with the resources and tools that they would need to be successful on their clean energy journey wherever they are in the process. So that ranges from our virtual monthly webinar series where we tackle different energy topics from microgrids to tribal energy sovereignty to what's happening with energy subsidies, and we run the gamut there. So here's one just last month for September. We did a session on weatherization and electrification and how those two concepts go hand in hand with special guests from the Montana Weatherization Training Center out in Bozeman. We also host and co-sponsor some clean energy expos. So if you haven't yet heard about it, I'm sure many of you have. This Saturday from 10 to 2 is the Climate and Clean Energy Expo at Caris Park. And we'll have a table there. Would love to see you. And that is spearheaded by Climate Smart Missoula. We also support the Sun Run and Clean Energy Expo in Helena. And we host different community events as requested and as needed across the state. Our flagship event is the Montana Clean Energy Fair, which is the one-stop shop for really all things renewable energy in the state of Montana and day-long workshops that we transition to provide across the state. So we've held a few of these Montana Clean Energy Fairs in Missoula, Helena, Bozeman, and Butte. This year was the first time we brought the fair to Billings, which was incredibly successful. We learned a ton, and our intent there is, again, to bring some renewable energy exposure and education, even for folks just starting out and might be clean energy curious, to more pockets of Montana. And so that's why we brought it to Billings, and then we also have an eye on Great Falls in the coming years. Another piece of our work is just spotlighting successful solar and renewable energy projects across Montana. We think by amplifying the successful projects that might have been, for example, here we've got a Melville Ranch that used USDA Rural Development REAP program grant funding to get solar on their property, and how that transformed their ranch operations and their utility bill. We talked about the Discovery Ski Area just got solar to offset 80% of the electricity usage for one of their primary ski lifts. We also highlighted the Moss Mountain Inn up in the Flathead Valley, that we have a range from Airbnbs to ski hills to so many folks. Even here on the bottom here is the Apex Solar Project that just went live about 2 months ago, and that's a utility scale development project in Beaverhead County. So we're amplifying the projects that exist that a number of folks might not know about otherwise. Our work also takes us to inroads for the next generation of solar and renewable energy resource professionals to enter Montana's clean energy workforce. This is an announcement that just came out yesterday, pretty fresh off the press. The Montana Office of Commissioner of Higher Education and a number of different partners, including the Montana Economic Development Association, are working through statewide micro-credentialing initiatives for two-year colleges across Montana with a specific focus in the trades. And what MREA is currently working on is assessing for the two-year colleges that would like to see solar and solar technicians as a part of their micro-credentialing programming through these pathways, that we're both recruiting students who might want to pursue that, and then also connecting them with potential jobs after that micro-credentialing process is over. So let's jump into what's happening with renewables in Montana. But before we can jump into Montana, I want to give you a bird's eye view of what's happening on the national scale. Looking at some data provided by the Solar Energy Industry Association, we see that nationally, as the Q3 2023 numbers came through, over the last decade, solar has experienced average annual growth rate of 24%. So on the national scale, we've got 155 gigawatts of solar capacity, and we're just talking solar here, not even all renewable energy resources. 155 gigawatts of solar capacity installed in the US, and that's enough to power 27 million homes. So the growth rate is just sometimes feels unfathomable, but it gives me a lot of energy to know that this is happening all across the United States. If we're taking a look at wind, now we can go to the Montana scale. We're looking at wind potential and also wind generation. The utility scale wind comes to play in Montana, and I know this isn't a new revelation for many people in the crowd, but truly, utility scale wind is kicking. In early 2023, our state had nearly 1,500 megawatts of wind power generating capacity in operation, and there's another 1,400 megawatts in the queue or soon to be either in early stages of planning and under construction. And that's data from the Independent Energy Information Association, or Administration, the EIA. Looking at solar in Montana, again, drawing from data from the Solar Energy Industry Association, the solar industry of Montana represents about 350 jobs and 248 megawatts of total installed capacity. That's enough to power 32,000 homes. But still, in the broad scheme, it's a very, very, very small percentage of Montana's energy generation. We're looking at still less than, actually with the new Q3 numbers, less than 0.1% of the state's electricity consumption comes from solar. So we have massive potential on the national scale, and at the same time, massive potential for adoption here in Montana. The latest information I knew about, or that I've heard about solar potential, and this is pretty tried and true fact that I think it's Montana's solar potential is between 24 to 25% above the national average for solar irradiance. So we've got more potential than what people often think with our cold winters. A misconception. Now, this comes directly from Northwestern Energy's most recent integrated resource plan, which is still not totally finalized, but it is public information, and there's been listening sessions happening about this IRP process. So if we were looking at Northwestern, which is our largest utility operating in the state of Montana and serving the most Montana customers, their energy generation mix has a whole lot of contracted wind and utility scale wind, if I can get the laser to work. Oh, it might not work on the TV, that's all right. But we're looking at over 20% of the portfolio wind, contracted wind, 2% owned, and a very, very small portion here in the corner that you can potentially not even see is a utility scale solar and contracted solar. So again, massive potential for solar adoption on the utility scale side and the distributed side. By the numbers, Northwestern Energy has about 30 megawatts of installed capacity for DERs. That stands for Distributed Energy Resources, majority of which is rooftop solar and distributed solar. So that represents just over 4,000 households and families in the state of Montana. The current integrated resource plan for Northwestern Energy anticipates net metered and distributed solar adoption. I'm talking generally because majority of the distributed energy resources in Montana are small scale and rooftop solar, but there is some small wind and other resources that are net metered on the distributed side, the customer side of the meter. But the current integrated resource plan still anticipates an adoption rate that uses data from the last round of integrated resource planning. So there hasn't been any major change on the utilities predictions. They still predict a fairly aggressive adoption rate of 240 megawatts of installed capacity by 2040. When we're looking toward what's happening with renewables in Montana, we also got to think about price. So this comes from the EIA as well. The breakdown and this is on average, so I'm not talking about any one specific utility, but the data that's provided statewide and comparing to the national average for retail rate cost of electricity in cents per kilowatt hour. Our residential, commercial, and industrial still generally fall below the U.S. average. And so that factors in, even though we have potential to see some significant retail electricity rate increases from in the coming years, in the next 10, 20 plus years, we're still in a pocket of the rates that are slightly below the national average, meaning that your payback time for rooftop solar might, again, if we're following that trend, be slightly below the national average for duration of time. And so that's a factor that some folks are considering, and this was drawn from the latest data from June in 2023. So I don't know if you've looked at your utility bill recently, but I would highly encourage you to check if you're an MEC customer or Northwestern, see what you're paying for that retail rate. And another note here is that we're talking in generalities here, but some of the rate classes, like commercial and industrial, have different elements to their rate structure. You might have a peak demand charge or something that would be factored into that price. Transitioning to covering some IRA incentives and what MREA is looking at as we charge ahead. And so as far as trends with the industry, I gave you a general sense of how many rooftop solar customers are in Montana, ranging from about 4,000 to 4,500 customers. And we're seeing that increase each and every day, especially with the increasing popularity and interest of the incentives that are coming through from the federal level. And I'll be sharing a few of what those are today. And this is just a screenshot of an article that MREA was quoted in through the Public News Service. Happy to share that article if you are interested, but it goes through that 1 year in IRA investments bolstering Montana homes and businesses, and also has some quotes from Mountain Line. Oops. All right. So as much as I would love to spend the next 3 hours talking about IRA rebates and incentives and all of the different programs that are under this large umbrella through the IIJA and the IRA, I'm going to cherry pick a few that are the most important and of high priority for MREA and what we're looking at down the line. So one of the most instrumental of the incentives coming out of the IRA is the 30% ITC tax credit, which you can often be recognized as the clean energy tax credit. So that is designed for residential and commercial owners to take 30% off the sticker price of their solar system or storage or small wind, and that can be claimed on your taxes, and that can be rolled over if your tax liability is not quite that full 30% of the cost of a system. And so that's major. We saw that dip over the years into the low 20s, 26%, but the 30% ITC is available until 2032, and that's really key. Then additionally, the IRA opened up the door for direct pay for nonprofits and municipalities that may not have a tax liability. We're still waiting on clarity of what that pathway will entail, expecting some more details by 2024. But MREA is going to be on the forefront of making sure that our churches and schools and municipalities are aware of and can take advantage of the potential for a 30% credit pretty much off the sticker price of the cost of a solar system, and that's going to be major. And that was one of the things that held a lot of non-tax liable organizations back, and so that's good. That's a game changer, truly. Additionally, the Rural Energy for America program, often called REAP, and we've got a few articles about REAP on our social media as well as our website if you're not familiar. But REAP was significantly expanded to, it's a grant process, and it is competitive, but the grant process is open to eligible agricultural businesses and rural entities. So Missoula directly is not eligible, but if you are a agricultural producer or are working in the ag field in Missoula, you may qualify. And so that project, or the REAP grant, offers up to 50% reimbursed cost of the system for a project up to $1 million. So that's also a major game changer. Coming soon, the home energy rebate programs, ideally around 2024. These will be, so this is a federal program that's actually going to be administered by our state energy office. So the Department of Environmental Quality is setting up their systems right now to create the mechanisms for the rebate program. Income eligibility and some of the dynamics around who's eligible to go for this stuff is still getting sorted. But again, that's one that I am incredibly excited about because we've got formula funds, federal dollars coming in for energy efficiency and renewable related rebate programs for homes. And then there's a whole slew of, and I apologize, I don't have a label on this image over here, but the renewable energy eligible projects, that's for REAP grants. So the most popular are definitely in the solar and wind categories, but they also offer REAP grants for biomass, anaerobic digesters, small hydro, and geothermal. The waves and ocean power, hopefully Montana doesn't get to that point. And then just to close up on these grant opportunities for nonprofit schools and for low-income solar access, there's a whole host of grants that a lot of our partners are currently tracking and we are also currently tracking. One is the Solar for All EPA funding opportunity. So that's a competitive grant aimed to increase solar access for low-income individuals and disadvantaged communities. And Montana is currently in process to put together a proposal that will have a regional impact for Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. And so MREA is working with the key partners in that to ideally put together a program that can be a reality in the coming years. So we're really excited about that. Again, that's $7 billion of funding for EPA Solar for All, and Montana might be seeing somewhere in the ballpark of don't quote me on this, but I believe it's around 50 million is what we are asking for Montana, so that would be really big. One more piece of news here, and this is again with these grant opportunities for municipalities and nonprofits and schools. The Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, also administered through EPA, each state was eligible for it was also formula funding, but the state of Montana was eligible for $3 million specifically focused on creating some plans around carbon and climate pollution reduction, and we could go through a number of different sectors to make that happen. And so MREA was involved in making sure that the state did apply for that funding, and they got it. So the first round is non-competitive, and they've actually hired a coordinator that will be starting at the end of October to start addressing how the state will approach this plan, and we want to make sure that distributed energy, renewable transition, and workforce development is a key focus in that plan and make sure it's a priority. But that is coming soon, and I'm incredibly excited about it. There's some competitive money on the table too that will launch by this spring, and it is yet to be determined if Montana will be pursuing some of the competitive funding to take that plan into the implementation phase. Okay, I'll take a small pause here. Does anyone have questions? I want to be sure about our time. I think I've only got a couple more slides if we're okay on time, but any questions from what I covered so far? Yes?
The grant opportunities category for nonprofits that, so I might have missed a piece of this, but that Montana, Idaho, 3 states, and Montana got some money. What state agency are you partnering with for that?
Yeah, so the application for Solar for All, which could be for, it's ideally meant for families and like end users and homeowners. It's not as designed for organizations, but going back to that slide, if I can. How's that? Okay. There's a few different pockets of funding. One is actually called Renew America's Nonprofits, and that's it's designed more for efficiency upgrades, not so much for renewables or solar. But the state agency that we would partner with for Solar for All, designed for solar access for low-income and disadvantaged communities, is the Energy Office, the DEQ Energy Office. Yep, and they will be playing more of a partnership role, less of a leadership role. Is there a plan for that? Okay. Darn it. There you go. We're back. Back in business. The penultimate slides, we're not too far away. On the horizon, this is what MREA is going to be focusing on in the coming years and looking ahead into the future. I mentioned that Solar for All competition. That is not set in stone. We've applied through partners to access that funding, but once we get it, then it's planning time, then it's game time. So we won't know about that until likely the end of this year or maybe early 2024. We're also looking for more ways to streamline expedite the solar process for our installer business owners and for homeowners and for commercial entities. And any way that we can do that is safely, effectively, and using best practices, we want to do it. So we're currently looking into some research on ways to streamline the permitting process, make sure that inspectors and authorities with jurisdiction have the right tools to assess the safety of a solar system and making sure that that process is speedy and everyone involved knows what they're doing. So we're looking into some various programs that might help address that. This is also big news that just yesterday, the Biden administration announced the launch of the American Climate Corps. So we'll have over 20,000 Americans focused on climate resilience and clean energy jobs as a pipeline into the workforce through the American Climate Corps. So I'm excited by the potential there. That's brand spanking new, but absolutely aligns with MREA's mission to advance the industry, especially on the workforce front. So we're thrilled by the potential of what's to come on that. So that concludes mainly the details that I wanted to share with you about MREA, where we're headed, and a smattering of financing and incentives and IRA-related programs that we are tracking. We want to make sure that we can keep tabs on these things and provide the best information for you all and the rest of Montana. So in order to do that, it is incredibly helpful to have the support of Montanans who see this as a high-value resource that we offer as Montana Renewable Energy Association. So I would encourage you, if you are not yet a member, please become a member, either a supporting member or at whatever level makes sense for you. But that means that our voice can be strong in the halls of the Capitol, in the PSC, and then everywhere else across Montana, and in community meeting rooms, just like this one. So that's all I have for you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Maybe a quick question from Dave, then we got to go, okay, 2 questions, and then Evora.
Makenna, you said there's such a great potential in Montana for solar development. Why isn't it happening? What's the impediments to having that happen?
Yeah. That's a fair question. Well, I think that there's still a preconceived notion that solar just doesn't work in Montana, or we just don't get enough sun, which and everyone comes at it with different motivations as well, and maybe the payback time isn't quite enough, but there's so many different factors that go into the decision to go solar, whether it's climate, cost, potentially just cost certainty related as well. If I'm a consumer who doesn't want to see the cost of the price of power change, I might consider going solar on a stability argument point of view, but I think that those are a few of the things holding us back, and that well, Ralph said this yesterday, and so I'm going to quote direct that we culturally have to shift the renewable energy conversation from the political to the practical to have a higher adoption. I think that's one of the things holding us back. Yep. Yes.
A few years ago, Northwestern Energy was really trying to thwart distributed energy, because they said that people who had like rooftop solar weren't paying their fair share of their use of the grid, and we kind of put a kibosh to them limiting payments back to people who have solar. I'm kind of wondering if you know where that's at, because I think they continue to try and limit.
Sure. Yeah, and what was your name? Okay. Yes, so Patty asked, what is the status of the crediting system for rooftop solar customers? The way that they earn the credits is actually through this process called net metering. And if you want the handy dandy fact sheet explaining net metering, we've got a really good one on our website, and I've got one that I didn't bring in, but I can grab you one if you want it. And so Patty asked about what's the status, because it seems like the utilities are constantly asking for modifications to basically devalue rooftop solar. So we have seen that through a number of different sessions. There have been attempts to modify the credit system and devalue what we currently have for rooftop solar. And that's been a key focus of MREAs, is to highlight the value and the grid services, honestly, that distributed resources provide. And so where that stands right now is that we still have the one-to-one crediting system for the investor-owned utilities, and some of the co-ops also have a similar credit system. But the way that I see it is that with our smaller adoption rate, we're not at the level to have that conversation until we have higher distributed energy resource penetration. Like, we need to get to the level where we could even be able to analyze all of the different transmission costs, and then the benefits of also shaving peak demand, and collectively, if we have enough thousands of people either conserving on the energy efficiency side, which we also don't usually get into those debates, it's like, well, if I decided to add a bunch more insulation or make my home more efficient, am I on the hook for the power that I didn't purchase? So the debate is ongoing on a national scale as well, and so I think the most important part to me is increasing the adoption rate of distributed energy resources, shaving peak demand, and getting to a level where perhaps that conversation could come back up. Yes?
You didn't really talk about geothermal, and I'm wondering if that's something that you have information on.
Yeah, so our website, the Renewable Energy Association, MontanaRenewables.org, we do have some breakout segments about different renewable energy sources. The reason I didn't cover as much with geothermal is just because there's not a ton of that activity happening on a business level with our organization, but doesn't mean it's not happening. So just at a smaller scale than what we see come through our doors, but we do have some information about it. Yeah.
I have a question about the solar for all.
Okay.
Do you see any potential for linking that funding to affordable housing?
100%, yes. And there's a lot of flexibility with how the program design and rollout can be set up. There will actually, if the funding is awarded, we would have a year of planning and then 3 to 4 years of implementation. So I see a key intersection there with affordable housing and serving low and moderate income individuals across Montana to empower people with a way to be able to have more affordable utility bills and generate their own power and their own electricity. I think that would be massive. So yes, we're in discussion with some of the affordable housing partners in Montana too, and so that's on the table, yes. Connie.
Probably not time for a full discussion on this, but I'm really interested in micro-credentialing that's going on through the university system, and how many students are enrolling and the outcomes. So
Yeah, happy to talk about it. It is in the early stages. Like the press release just came out yesterday, September 20th. So they're still in the planning phase, but there's 14 two-year colleges that are participating, and they're hoping for more. So yes, happy to talk about that afterwards. Yes.
Well, I just wanted to say, I remember when Montana Tech had a whole renewable track in their two-year college program, and then it petered out. I mean, this idea of, training people, young people for, the solar trades is not particularly new, and I don't know what happened with that, but I think it also was political in terms of, Montana Tech had a whole thing, and they had a waiting list and everything for a few years, and then it just kind of disappeared.
Sure.
So I think it's great that we're bringing something like that back, but we had that, and there was all those, with all good intentions, and a lot of people were interested, and a few people got to go through the program. I don't know if you knew about that.
Yeah, and ultimately we're adapting to needs. It was question/comment about the different renewable energy or clean tech, I think there was also like a wind professional program, a 2-year program in Great Falls that came and went. So the concept here is like the workforce development and training programs are nothing new, but we can be more responsive to understand like why those programs might not have worked. Perhaps a 2-year associate's degree isn't the right pathway for someone that's getting into that field. That's where the micro-credentialing I think is incredibly exciting, because it can get someone their foot in the door, might not require an associate's to get into an energy resource professional field, but could open up career opportunities into the future and also potentially put them back in school, just depending on the pipeline that they're looking at. Yeah, so we're excited to adapt. All right, thank you everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Makenna. Up next, we have Evora Glen. Evora is the Climate and Sustainability Specialist for the City of Missoula, where she works collaboratively with partner communities and organizations to design and implement programs that advance renewable energy, electrification, and energy efficiency. Prior to joining the city, Evora worked for MREA and focused on expanding rural access to solar development, as well as connecting renewable energy with transportation and agriculture. She received a master's in resource conservation from the University of Montana while working in the Rocky Mountain Research Station and the Pew Research Center to examine collaborative processes for addressing complex environmental challenges. She loves to imagine our sustainable future full of gardens, good food, and a strong sense of belonging in our communities. So I'm going to invite Evora up.
Thanks, Winona. Can you all hear me all right? Right. You all might have picked up on that, but I did used to work with MREA, so I always love hearing all the work that you guys do. It's amazing. I'm excited to talk with you tonight about the city's climate action. So like Winona said, I'm Evora Glen. I work with the city. I am our climate and sustainability specialist. There's 2 of us. I work on our energy programs, so energy efficiency, electrification, renewable energy, and my counterpart, Lee Ratterman, who's not able to be here today, she works on our zero waste and our resiliency programs. So I'm going to do a big overview of all the things we're working on, going to focus on this last year or so to share what we've accomplished and what we have in progress. And as I go through those different programs, you're going to notice that a lot of them are collaborative. So we work really closely with the county, we work really closely with Climate Smart Missoula, and a variety of other partners. And I'm going to do my best to try and emphasize that as I go through, because if you imagine our two-person team, we have to work together to get a lot of things done with our whole community. So before I dive into the details of what we've been up to, I wanted to start with a bit of an overview of what our city's commitments are, for those of you who maybe aren't as familiar. So the city has a goal of reaching carbon neutrality by 2025, which carbon neutrality really means balancing the greenhouse gas emissions we produce with the greenhouse gas emissions that we sequester. We produce greenhouse gas emissions primarily through burning fossil fuels. We sequester them primarily through our urban forests, our parklands, where vegetation brings in carbon from the air and stores it in soil. So we're really looking to balance that. The big effort we have to put into making that carbon neutral goal is, of course, reducing what we produce primarily. We have a carbon neutrality goal by 2050 for the entire community, so community-wide. And then as kind of an intermediate goal of that broader carbon neutrality goal by 2050, we also are aiming for 100% clean electricity by 2030. And that's to align with global goals to reduce emissions 50% by 2030 compared to 2005 levels. So transitioning to 100% clean electricity, investing in all of the renewable generation that Makenna was talking about is one of the main ways that we can make that dramatic, fast shift and reduce emissions sizably. We also have our zero waste by 2050 commitment, which aligns with that carbon neutrality goal because of the emissions of what we consume. So I'll get into this a little bit more, but we're really aiming for more of a circular economy, where we don't focus on, where we shift away from extraction to trash. And we start really reusing, repurposing, recycling, and composting our materials so they stay circling through our economy and we don't have the kind of emissions we have from our disposable products now. And lastly, we have our Climate Ready Missoula Resiliency Plan, which is about trying to recognize that when we are making progress on reducing emissions, we also have to grapple with the climate impacts we're experiencing now, and we have to plan for the climate impacts we're going to face. And so that plan is about how we align our transition to carbon neutrality with those adaptation measures, with those resiliency measures. So as I talk about those different goals, I want to just ground us in the area we're looking at. So our goals encompass the area through our growth policy boundary, which extends beyond the city's current limits and includes where the city expects to grow into. So when we talk about carbon neutrality, 100% clean electricity, this is the area that we're looking at serving, and that's just so that when we are comparing our progress in the future as the city grows, we have the same baseline. We're comparing back to the same area. So I'll start off with our city operations. You will notice right away that our water and wastewater, which our wastewater is now our resource recovery facility, they comprise the majority of our emissions from our city operations. And second to that is our buildings and our vehicles. And so when we look at how do we reduce emissions from our city operations, the primary place we focus is on those biggest pieces of the pie. So some of our most recent accomplishments that we're really excited to share is that the Resource Recovery Facility brought online their solar array this year. They were really inspired by looking at the emissions inventory and recognizing that they were such a large portion of those emissions. And so they took initiative in the water department to investigate doing solar, looking at where they should do it, and they brought on one of the largest behind-the-meter arrays in the state. So we're really proud of that, and that's the kind of initiative we need across all city operations to meet our goals. We also are doing an energy performance contract, which is basically working with a consultant that did auditing of all of our city operations and identified where we could do energy efficiency improvements that were cost-effective over a 20-year period, meaning that they paid for themselves basically over that time period. And we're moving forward with the first phase of those improvements, and that's the first step of many. This is going to be a continual process that we continue to explore. We also have updated our climate action website, which I emphasize because for a long time it was fairly neglected, and now we've really made it current, brought in new information there, connected out to a lot of resources in our community, and hopefully that can be a good, useful hub for any questions you have about renewable energy, any of our climate action goals. You can visit that, and it'll be a useful resource now. We also passed a climate lens resolution this year, and that resolution is about committing the city to integrating climate considerations across all operations. And that's a pretty tall order. Some of the ways that we are getting started with that is by implementing new policies. So this year we already implemented an environmentally sustainable building policy, which lays out the process for every new development or retrofit for the city, what process they need to go through to align with our climate goals and make sure they're doing electrification, doing renewable energy, doing overall efficiency measures. We also have a new vehicle emissions reduction policy, which likewise tries to align our vehicle procurement with our climate goals. So we're prioritizing zero tailpipe emission vehicles if those aren't available for the use, looking at the next highest efficiency vehicles, and at the same time, encouraging right sizing of our fleet. So do we need all the vehicles that we currently have? Could we do the same operations and services with a smaller vehicle, perhaps a smaller electric vehicle, one that has better fuel economy, those kinds of considerations. So that policy lines out the process for our procurement, our replacement of vehicles, so that we're continuously thinking about how to make those choices with climate in mind. Some of the things we still have in progress are the rest of that climate lens implementation. So like I said, integrating climate consideration across all city operations is a tall order. We have new staff newsletters that try and share successes the city is making with other staff, also share kind of their fun, inspiring tips about how they're living sustainably, but it's a lot more than that. We're institutionalizing climate consideration into our requests for proposals, for different project designs. We're integrating it into the way we do scopes of work. We're integrating it into how we choose contractors, consultants, design teams, how we integrate climate considerations into our budget process. So there's a lot of different ways that we're exploring how to make this a consistent, streamlined way, aspect of the way that the city works. And lastly, I'll mention internally, like Makenna referred to, there's a lot of funding that we are working to coordinate around. So there is funding for almost every aspect of city operations that now has a climate component, a equity component, an affordable housing component. And those are all different specialties in the city, different departments, and so we're working to bring together all of that knowledge so we can have really rich applications and be more competitive. And at the same time, make sure that we don't miss opportunities. So zooming out to the broader community, I want to ground us in our broader community greenhouse gas inventory. You'll notice here that commercial and residential, the gray and orange, is 59% of our emissions, and that's primarily buildings. The other large portion is transportation. And so when we think about how do we reduce emissions from buildings and transportation, the primary ways are electrifying our buildings, electrifying our vehicles, and then powering that electricity with renewable sources. So that's what we prioritize in our community work right now. We have just launched this June an energy efficiency rebate program for heat pump water heaters. If you think about whatever appliance you have that heats your water at home, heat pump water heaters are basically that version, but highly efficient electric ones. And so we have $575 for a residential heat pump available right now. I have some flyers in the back if anybody is interested. That's one of the ways we're trying to make it easier to make this transition. We also worked with a clean electricity consultant that explored the different paths we can take to reach our 100% clean electricity goal. One of their main recommendations was to continue pursuing work on our renewable rate option. Our renewable rate option is a collaborative process with the City of Bozeman and with Missoula County and Northwestern Energy to design a program for new renewable energy at a utility scale to serve our communities. Right now, we're designing it to be as broad as possible, so we want it to serve residents, we want it to serve businesses, we want it to serve municipalities like city and county operations. And so we're working on that, and we're excited to continue doing that since we know that utility scale renewable energy development is one of the biggest chunks of our path towards 100% clean electricity. We're also looking at our local scale. So as Makenna mentioned, the new tax credits with the IRA are available to local governments for the first time. There's the base tax credit of 30%, but there are also bonus tax credits. And we happen to know that here in Missoula, there are many areas where we would qualify for up to 40% tax credits on our renewable energy system. So this is new context for city and county. We're now revisiting what it would look like to develop our own projects. What are the economics of that now that we ourselves can benefit from 40% off? It's a huge change. We're also doing grants coordination broadly throughout the city. So we've been coordinating internally to make sure we don't miss opportunities, but there's also a lot of opportunities that aren't for municipalities, for local government, and we're trying to make those connections to our nonprofit partners, to the university, to our local schools district, and make sure that nothing goes through the cracks. So it's been a pleasure to work with Makenna on the Solar for All opportunity and coordinate around that so that we can get a good representation from Missoula in that Montana application. We also are looking at the other aspects of the IRA that are not grants. So Makenna mentioned this, I just mentioned it with the tax credits for local government, but there are tons of tax credits for renewable energy, but also energy efficiency upgrades, electric vehicle charging stations. They're available to residents, to renters, to home builders, to businesses, to nonprofits, to local governments. It's huge. The rebates that Makenna referred to with Department of Environmental Quality are going to hopefully be out next year, and that's going to be additional benefits. For lower income folks, 80% of the area median income, they could get 100% of the cost of an upgrade covered. So these are big incentives. So what we've been working on through our Electrify Missoula campaign is to start turning out the outreach materials to make sure people understand what these upgrades are, understand what the financing opportunities are, and that you might qualify even if you didn't think you would normally. A lot of these tax credits are now directly available to folks who don't have tax equity, right? They get them through direct payments, also called elective pay. And so this is a really big opportunity, and we have additional resources at that back table if anybody here would like to check them out. electrifymissoula.org is the website where we pull together all the educational information and financial information that can help you with those processes, those transitions in your home or business. With all of that work going on, we're also very happy to have additional capacity coming online. We were super heartened to see that Mayor Jordan Hess brought forward an innovative solution to a tight budget where he found grant funding and federal funding to support a new capacity position for our climate team. That position will specifically focus on building and transportation electrification, which is going to be very important as we look at a decade or more of incentives available for those efforts. And I emphasize the need for this new capacity because we have so much potential, and it's important that we take action in order to actualize it. And I want to show this graph because I think it represents that well. So this shows the United States greenhouse gas emissions and the projected reductions based on different policy. The blue shows the potential reduction in emissions from current policy before the Inflation Reduction Act. The orange shows the potential reduction in emissions after the Inflation Reduction Act. And you'll see that there's pretty broad ranges. The biggest factor in how much reduction we have in our emissions is how well we utilize these opportunities. So it depends on communities like ours all across the country in getting the word out about these tax credits, about these rebates, about these grant opportunities, and making sure that federal money comes here. So we need the extra capacity, and we are going to put it to work immediately. One other thing I want to emphasize is that you'll see this tiny black bar at the bottom. That is our goal. That's the reducing emissions by about 50% by 2030. So you'll see that even with all of this federal funding, we have more work to do to meet our goal. And for me, that is energizing. I hope it is energizing for others. It keeps us going, right? We have to be creative. We have to do this and. We have to do this and more. So I'm going to transition a little bit here. I've been talking a lot about electrification and renewable energy, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our 0 by 50 goal. So when I first showed our community emissions, you may have noticed that this little segment I highlighted in red here, our solid waste, is only 5%. So you might think, why are we focusing on waste? It's not one of the biggest wedges, right? So I call this out because in our greenhouse gas emissions, those emissions for solid waste only account for the emissions from our landfill. All the emissions that go into mining the metals and minerals, processing them, manufacturing our goods, packaging our goods, transporting them, storing them until they end up with us, all of those emissions are in other people's inventories. They're in other communities, other countries, and it can be really difficult to account for them, but we know that they are quite substantial. And we also know it's easier to meet our clean electricity goals when we use less electricity overall, right, if we are more efficient. So we focus on waste because what we're really talking about, again, is a circular economy. So transitioning away from extraction to trash for multiple reasons. When we reuse those resources, we have less new energy put into new mining, new growing of our biological materials. But it also means that we can preserve our landscapes for other uses. One of the biggest threats around climate change is biodiversity loss. It really threatens our food systems, our clean water, our ability to sustain ourselves. And our consumption is a bit of a double whammy. There's huge emissions from our consumption that worsen climate change, but also our consumption directly impacts habitat for biodiversity. And so that's something that we keep in mind as we try and communicate the value of making this transition as well. So some of the work that we've been doing is we coordinated with Home Resource on an EPA grant for a hard-to-recycle materials center. That's things like, your electronics that have valuable minerals in them, but, they can't go to public services, right? This grant was really competitive. There was one award for all of Region 8 of the EPA, and we got to the second round of review, and we didn't get it this time. But what that means is now we have a complete application, we have a complete budget, we have a complete narrative, we're ready to go for next opportunities. We also have moved forward with new recycling bins downtown. You may have noticed the bright blue, beautiful bins. This is a small step in the long-term vision, right? We want to get to a place where we don't have trash bins, where we only have recycling and compost and repurposing opportunities, but it's an important first step. So we're proud to be going in that direction, and we recognize we have a long way to go. Some of the other things we have in progress are developing an internal strategy for zero waste in city operations. So Lee Ratterman, my counterpart who leads this work, she's been working with a University of Montana intern to set up a pilot program for Splash Montana to get them to zero waste and hopefully learn some lessons around how we can expand that to other aspects of city operations. Another exciting opportunity in the works is that Home Resource has been moving forward with a hazardous waste collection facility that will hopefully be open this fall. And hazardous waste collection, you're thinking of your motor oil, your coolant, things where if you are like me and had to clean out a garage lately, it is very difficult to find out where those things can go. there are often collection opportunities once or twice a year. This would be a much more frequent opportunity and would make it a lot easier to dispose of those hazardous materials safely. We've also been working on improving zero waste events. So the County Fair and Roots Fest really invested in zero waste infrastructure. So they had composting, recycling, they pushed for compostable and recyclable disposable containers. And we saw 57,000 pounds of compost diverted from the landfill through those two events combined. So that's impressive progress, and that's the direction we have to keep going. And lastly, I just want to note that our Food Policy Board is moving forward with looking into how we can reduce food waste. And I was reading recently that our food waste can be a pretty big source of emissions when you think about it. So about 2% of the United States emissions are from the energy used to produce food that never gets eaten. So when you think about that and then extrapolate out to the rest of our disposable goods, right? Plastic bags you use once, paper cups you use once, there's a lot of energy into that consumption overall. And lastly, I want to talk about our climate resiliency goals. So even if we are wildly successful in our climate efforts, we know we're already seeing climate impacts right now, and we know we're going to keep seeing them. That's just, that's what the science tells us right now. And so we have to find a way to continue making that really needed progress in reducing our emissions while we experience these potentially disruptive events. And that's what our climate resiliency is really about. So we already are experiencing more smoky summers, hotter heat events, hotter and longer heat events, drought, and at the same time, flooding, wildfires. And with all of those local challenges, we also recognize that there are other parts of the country where people may be experiencing even more severe issues. And so people may be moving here as a refuge despite all those challenges that we are experiencing. And that adds another layer of having to plan for what if there's potential climate migration. We saw a big influx in our population during the COVID-19 pandemic, and there's potential for a similar event to happen due to climate events across the country. And so some of the work that we have started on those efforts is that we continue to support Climate Smart Missoula's wildfire preparedness program through our community benefits organization grants. We give them annually. We also have a climate strategic implementation team, which is one of the ways we are bringing together staff across city departments to address how we integrate climate action into city work. One of the things that team is working on is looking at our resiliency plan and trying to identify where the city can help fill gaps. What's being done now, what needs to be done, what can the city do in our role. And one of the roles that were identified in that work is that there could be more effort to look at how we can be more wildfire ready within city limits. So a lot of times we think about the wildland-urban interface, where the city meets our national forest, and we try and plan around wildfire in those buffer areas. And we've increasingly seen entire towns that have succumbed to wildfire. And so this group identified that that might be a goal we need to explore further. Is what is the city's role in helping our community be wildfire ready at all parcels within the city, in all locations? And lastly, I want to touch on our Missoula project, our code reform and growth policy update. This is another way that we're really trying to capture resiliency. As I mentioned about climate migration, for example, if we know that it's possible we could have a large influx of population here, we're trying to balance a couple competing concepts, right? How are we welcoming and easily absorbing those migrations, and at the same time, how are we being realistic about the environmental limitations of our area? So there is only so much finite agricultural land, prime agricultural soil. There's only so much rich, biodiverse, riparian habitat. And so this planning effort is about, we can be smart about how we grow in a way that enables us to take on density and doesn't necessarily have to conflict with those other sources. One example I love is the pictures you've all probably seen of a street with cars in it where every individual is in their own car. And then it shows you every individual on a bus. every individual on a tram, every individual on the subway, every individual on bikes. And the big theme is that when you do more sustainable modes of transportation, you actually also need less space because you need less parking, less room for single occupancy vehicles. So that's one example, right, of how we can move towards our climate goals of reducing emissions and become more resilient at the same time and allow for us to absorb a larger population that we might see. So that is a lot about all the things that we're working on. There's more that we could not fit in this slideshow. But the main thing I wanted to end on quickly is just that, as I said before, we've accomplished a lot, we're doing a lot, and there's so much more that we need to do. So I always like to end with this because I find it motivating. I have my contact info up there. I have Lee's contact info up there. Please reach out to us. And also, if you know anybody who's interested in doing climate work, there are always opportunities for everyone to do this in any aspect of your lives. So this is for everyone, and we need everyone. And to me, that feels like fostering belonging as well. We're in it together, and we need each other to make our goals. So with that, I know I've shared a lot with you, but I'm happy to talk through any specific questions you might have about any of the programs I mentioned. We can get into nuances if you want. Yeah.
A few years ago, I attended city council meetings to advocate for building codes. So if you look at your pie chart, 35% commercial, 25% residential, of our emissions come from those two units. So it's over 75% or something, or 65%. So we were advocating for building codes to be changed to require new building of commercial and residential to be energy efficient and use renewable energy sources. And the city said, well, we recommend it, but we don't have those codes in place. And so I'm wondering if you have any updates on that.
Yeah, absolutely. The question was, recognizing that buildings are such a big source of our emissions, what can we do through building code to require some of the measures that we know reduce emissions, energy efficiency, electrification, renewable energy. So the city is in a bit of a difficult position with that because building code in Montana is established at the state level. And right now it is explicit in our statute at the state level that local municipalities like the city of Missoula cannot go above the state code in requirements. So we've really got our hands tied in that. What we are explicitly allowed to do is incentivize, encourage, otherwise outline what we would like to see. But in terms of requiring anything more stringent, we're currently not enabled to do that by state law. At the same time, you all may have noticed in our most recent legislative session that there has been some more pointed legislation around limiting specific provisions that might encourage or require transitions towards electrification over other fossil fuel uses. It has become more stringent in just this last year. So I guess to conclude, I am with you. It would be wonderful to be able to require the things that we know, common sense, are what we need to be doing. And right now we're working in an environment where we can't use that tool, and so we're exploring what other tools we can. And part of our code reform process is going to be looking at incentives that we can offer for folks to make the choices we know we need to be making. Yeah. Yeah, Jeremy.
I have a question. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Both Makenna and Evora. Really nice to see all the progress, future potential, and just really nice. Does the city measure carbon sequestration as it pertains to the urban forest? Is that, I know that's incredibly detailed and incredibly hard to, put a number on, but is that the other side of 100%,
Yes. So the question was, does the city measure sequestration from, for instance, the urban forest? And yes, we do. So the full number that I showed of our community emissions, that takes into account sequestration from our urban forest. I want to emphasize that it's not in our pie chart because it doesn't become part of our overall alignment of emissions. It is hard to account for the negative space in the pie chart, but the total number that is at the side of that chart does account for that sequestration. And that's something that we're cognizant of when we do planning, when we do this overall code reform process. Urban forestry, green infrastructure is a big part of that conversation, recognizing that it has so many mitigation impacts, reducing emissions, but also resiliency impacts, so it's a win-win. So, yes, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Seems like I want to thank you for the presentation too. I had no idea
Of course.
How organized you are, how future focused you are. It's really, truly impressive.
Thank you.
To hear what you're planning. But it seems like the linchpin of the whole getting to carbon neutrality has to do with purchasing carbon-free electricity. And, I understand that you've been negotiating with Northwestern Energy for 3 years now, over 3 years, without much to show for it so far. I've heard people talk about there might be a green tariff agreement with the utility that would seem not to get us where we need to go with the plans that you revealed tonight. Can you talk a little bit about the successes that you've had with negotiating with Northwestern Energies and maybe some of the problems and where you see that going?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question is around our renewable rate option, which is the collaborative process with the City of Bozeman, Missoula County, and Northwestern Energy. As was pointed out, it has been a long process. These have been difficult negotiations, and the question was specifically about, what are the successes and what have been the challenges to better understand, why is that process taking so long, if that's a fair characterization. So, yeah, it has been a long process. And I'd say some of the main challenges are the way that our utility is regulated in our state. We don't have options to easily work with any other energy providers. There would need to be state law change for us to municipalize as a city in order to own our own energy. So when we think about utility scale generation, one of the best avenues is working with Northwestern. That is what is enabled by current law. And so we go into those negotiations knowing that we need to have pretty comprehensive portfolio of other options, recognizing that even if we have a very successful project, we're looking at a lot of energy we're trying to produce with renewables, and that it's not likely we'll get to 100% with any one of our options. We need to combine many different approaches. So some of the challenges, have been that legislative landscape. With the process with Northwestern in particular, we are having to kind of pull together examples from other states that don't necessarily apply to our context, where there is such limited choice, where there is no real incentives for the utility to take on risk of their own. And so many other programs are a little bit easier to move forward when the utility is comfortable taking that risk, and that's something that they do on a regular basis. Our utility is not set up that way. And so we are having to be really creative about how to create a program that is fully subscribed, fully covered by all participants from the start, no potential gaps, no cost shifting. And that gets into a lot of process questions. How do we make this process work so that we can get the biggest size possible to serve the broadest suite of different residents, businesses, and institutions, and have the demand and the project generation align from the very start? So that, I think, has been one of the biggest challenges. We've often felt like we're really quite close, and we get into some of the details and we realize there's more to work out. Right now, We are, going over program documents, making sure they all speak together, refining, fine-tuning. And I think some of the successes there is that we've had progress where we say, this path won't work. We need to find a different solution. And we've had headway in having those conversations. I think we would be pretty discouraged if we said, hey, this won't work, and we didn't get any flexibility. I think that's an encouraging aspect when we say we need to figure something else out. We've had productive conversations recently to make those kinds of moves forward. So that's a little bit of kind of insight into that progress. I will say as well, thinking about our other menu of options, Northwestern is moving forward with their integrated resource plan, as Makenna mentioned, and we are working with them on this renewable rate option. At the same time, we were able to provide really constructive, detailed feedback about how their integrated resource plan does not align with our 100% clean electricity goals. And so that's something that we also are really transparent about. We're clear, we're specific, right? We talk about what doesn't align and why and what would need to be changed. And we do that because we recognize that even if we move forward with our renewable rate option, we need Northwestern to do their part in transitioning the rest of their portfolio as well. And we have had clear conversations about being on different timelines with that transition, and that's something that we're committed to continue discussing with them. So I know that it is taking longer than we would all want, and I think the main thing that we come back to is that it will be worthwhile when we get this done. It will be worthwhile when we get this done. Yeah.
I have a question. I'm just curious. I've been reading about smart grid technology.
Yeah.
And one podcast I listened to, they were saying that you can increase efficiency up to 40% by just adding little gadgets, without building new lines. And has that been part of the conversation with Northwestern?
So that, energy efficiency aspects has not been a part of our renewable rate option negotiations. It's definitely something that we encourage broadly in their integrated resource planning, but we are focused specifically on getting that new renewable energy generation onto the grid.
Because they always talk about, we can't use renewables because they're not dependable, and it seems like, smart grid technology would take care of that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of current existing solutions that make renewables really reliable. You have to pair them with the right storage. Obviously, shaving down peak demand is another way that we can meet 100% clean electricity goals faster. So I would agree with you. There are a lot of ways that we know work right now to bring more renewables onto the grid.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any plans for large battery storage facilities on rooftops and public buildings throughout the city?
Oh, it's an interesting question. So the question is, are there any plans for large battery storage facilities on top of rooftops in the city? We have been looking at battery storage in tandem with our exploration of renewable energy development based on these new tax credits. One of the exciting things about the new tax credits is that they extend to battery storage. Most of the time when we are looking at them, we're looking at them in combination with renewable energy, specifically, solar, for example. So we have not been looking as much at standalone, and the primary reason is because we're exploring if we can get more renewable energy on the grid by pairing with batteries. Whereas if we just have batteries, we are storing the current portfolio, which is also valuable. There's a lot of reasons to do that, but I think with our 100% clean electricity goal right around the corner, we are full steam ahead at trying to get more renewables online, and batteries are a big part of that, and we try to do them together. All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate being here. And thank you, Winona and Dave, for having us. It was totally lovely. I don't want to break this MCAT mic. Put it back in. Okay, perfect.
It's so high. Thank you all for coming. And make sure to check out the rest of the Climate Solutions events. There's an event tomorrow at the library at 9:30 a.m., Climate Conversations, and then also the expo at Caris Park on Saturday. You'll see a lot of us there tabling. So thanks again.
And we've got treats, right?
And there's lots of snacks.